Paul Kennedy, and this is Ideas.
As powerful and influential as information technology is today, it will be 1 billion times more powerful in 25 years. So we use a metaphor borrowed from physics to describe that, a singularity.
Computers and artificial intelligence are now so powerful that we may well be approaching the most pivotal moment in human history, the singularity, when machine intelligence exceeds our own and becomes super intelligence.
At some point, we will figure out how to make super intelligence, machines that are radically smarter than us. This kind of super intelligence, I believe, is an extremely powerful thing that could really shape the future, for the better or for the worse.
Will this be the dawn of a technological paradise, or will it trigger humanity's downfall?
I think the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race.
What kind of an intelligence will this be? A guru? A god? Or a monster?
I think we should be very careful about artificial intelligence. I mean, with artificial intelligence, we are summoning the demon.
And is the idea of uploading the human mind the promise of immortality, or a techno-pipe dream of religious transcendence?
One could say that the singularity simply is a religious concept, to the extent that the terms the infinite or the ultimate, if those terms are meaningful at all, it's in a sense that deserves to be called theological.
In this episode of Ideas, CBC radio producer Jim Lebbins explores the enormous potential and peril of machine superintelligence in a documentary we're calling Imagining the Singularity.
The afternoon of May 11th, 1997. Deep Blue challenges Kasparov's brain with an array of 256 processors that can examine 200 million possible moves every second. On Deep Blue's 19th move, the champion resigns.
Maybe that was the moment that future historians will point to when we began to lose the race against the machines. Or maybe it was more recently, in 2011, when IBM's Watson AI romped to victory on Jeopardy.
Even a broken one of these on your wall is right twice a day. Watson.
What is clock?
Clock is correct, and with that you move up to 23,000.
Or maybe it was just last year, when a new generation of AI proved its mettle at Go, considered the most difficult of games, by achieving full post-human excellence.
AlphaGo Zero is the strongest Go program in the world. It outperformed all previous versions of AlphaGo. Specifically, it defeated the version of AlphaGo that won against the world champion Lee Sedol, and it beat that version of AlphaGo by 100 games to 0.
You can see the pattern here. Artificial intelligence is emerging all around us, and it's exceeding human brainpower in new ways every day. It's not just in games. It's driving cutting-edge science, influencing your behavior through internet advertising, even predicting our political choices. And you're carrying AI in your pocket or purse. Smartphones are using AI algorithms, and they can now recognize your face and your voice, answer questions and follow instructions. AI software from Facebook and Google is mining our past and anticipating our social needs before we're even aware of them. Computers can even speak our languages. Okay, Google, say greetings to our computer overlords in Japanese.
私たちのコンピュータオーバーロードへの日本へのご挨拶。
The explosion of AI into so many domains has been breathtaking, but it's the next step that's really going to be revolutionary. As impressive as it is, current AI is limited to specialized tasks. But many observers think that in a relatively short time, perhaps within decades, AI will transcend its current limitations. It'll develop into a general intelligence that will be comparable to, and will probably significantly exceed, the full breadth of human intelligence. And that, most futurists expect, will transform the world. You might have heard some of this before, perhaps from the most famous popularizer of the idea, inventor and futurist Ray Kurzweil.
As powerful and influential as information technology is today, it will be 1 billion times more powerful in 25 years. And so you get to 2040s, the non-biological portion of our civilization's intelligence will be, by my calculations, actually 1 billion times greater than the biological portion. So we use a metaphor borrowed from physics to describe that, a singularity in human history. We can't easily see beyond this event horizon coming in human history because it's so transformative.
For years, Kurzweil and others have been making the case that this moment will be so revolutionary that it's impossible to even imagine how technology, the economy, and human society will be transformed. And like matter and light falling past the event horizon of a black hole, we can't see what happens to it, what new form it might take. That's the singularity. But as we get closer to this moment, there are people who are trying to push beyond that event horizon, to try and anticipate what the dawn of superintelligence will look like. They're attempting to think past that supposedly impenetrable frontier to imagine the singularity.
I'm Nick Bostrom. I'm a professor at Oxford University, where I direct the Future of Humanity Institute. At some point, we will figure out how to make machines generally intelligent, have the same general purpose, smartness, learning, planning ability that we humans have. And then I think after that, superintelligence, machines that are radically smarter than us. And this kind of superintelligence, I believe, is an extremely powerful thing that could really shape the future. It literally could be the best thing that ever happened in all of human history, if we get this right. And my main concerns with relation to this transition to the machine intelligence era is that we get that superintelligence done right so that it's aligned with human values. A failure to properly align this kind of artificial superintelligence could lead to human extinction or other radically undesirable outcomes.
That seems a powerful argument for understanding what we're getting into and planning for it. But another reason to imagine the singularity is that this is something humans have always thought about.
Hi, my name is Madeline Ashby, and I am a science fiction writer and futurist. I think that we as a species have always been interested in intelligence and in investigating intelligences like our own.
We can imagine the singularity because we've imagined it many times before.
I think that the story of what it means to create a thinking being, an intelligent being, has fascinated us from the beginning of our species. These are old stories. It's not just Blade Runner. It's not just Frankenstein. It's not just, stories about robots. It's the Bible. It's every creation story that's ever existed because we are fascinated with the idea of creating in our own image. The anxiety around creating an intelligent being and a thinking being, no matter what shape it may take, is the anxiety of having a child and seeing your own flaws reflected back to you.
You hear certain words when people speak about the singularity. Creation, transcendence, apocalypse. These are familiar ideas because this is the language of religion.
There's a sense in which futurism, looking at the future, imagining the future, hoping for the future, is something that historically has been within the purview of religion. It's been an expression of religious sentiment. I'm James McGrath, a religion professor at Butler University. Whether it's the view that things will keep getting worse and worse until eventually there is a cataclysm and everything begins to cycle over again, whether it is a new era, the kingdom of God, a restoration of paradise, all of those things are expressions of hope, expressions of faith that there is some meaning to the universe, some divine plan or underlying rationale that has a trajectory.
So how do we imagine the singularity? Well, perhaps the first step is to try and understand what it is we're trying to create. A machine superintelligence. How do we create a computerized mind greater than our own? I'm visiting someone who's trying to create this new kind of computer intelligence. It's something quite different from the computers we're used to. It's inspired by the most successful and powerful computers that the universe, to our knowledge, has ever produced. The massively parallel, hyper-efficient, infinitely flexible biological computers we all carry in our heads.
Hello.
Hi, Chris. I'm Jim Levins.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
How are you?
Good, thanks. Yourself?
Good. Predictably got lost, mostly in this building.
My name is Chris Eliasmith. I'm the director of the Center for Theoretical Neuroscience at the University of Waterloo.
and a professor in systems design engineering and philosophy. And I hold the Canada Research Chair in theoretical neuroscience. And I'm also a co-CEO of Applied Brain Research.
I'm at the University of Waterloo to see Chris Eliasmith's brain. Not the 1.5 kilos of fatty cells he carries around in his head. In fact, it's a simulated brain, a brain model that he spent much of the last decade working on. This electronic brain is called SPAWN.
SPAWN, Semantic Pointer Architecture Unified Network.
SPAWN is a large-scale whole brain type model that we constructed beginning in about 2012. We have a visual system, we have a motor system, we have decision-making systems and so on. But really all the model is millions and millions of neurons. So it's about 4.5 million neurons, and they're all connected to each other. So, for most of these, you can see that I've got a name like working memory on this box. And for the most part, it's not unreasonable to say, this is part of frontal cortex. But in a way, yeah, you can think of this as the anatomy of the SPAWN system. So we definitely think that, if we can build a brain which reproduces all the kinds of tasks and has all the parts that a real brain does, then it should have the functions of a real brain.
But here's where we're going to discover an important thing about AI. It can be very smart without being very human-like. To understand more, let's take a quick detour to visit another researcher working towards computer superintelligence, computer scientist Doina Prekup of McGill University. She studies machine learning, a field that's seen enormous growth, and it's the kind of AI that you've been reading about in the headlines. She's just been recruited to run a new lab in Montreal for Google's AI-focused sister company, DeepMind, which developed the world champion Go computer.
A lot of us anticipate that superhuman intelligence, in fact, will be possible in the not too distant future. I think we certainly are far from having general purpose intelligence. So one computer that can achieve really good performance at many different tasks.
The distinction that Dr. Prekup underlines between superhuman intelligence and human-like general intelligence is an important one, because one is much harder to achieve than the other. In some ways, we've had superhuman intelligence for decades. Don't believe me? Well, quick, tell me the square root of, let's say, 6,794. Got it? Not yet? Well, let's get some help. Okay, Google, what's the square root of 6,794?
Square root 6,794 is approximately 82.426.
Now, you might recall that as recently as the 1960s, a computer was a human who was really good at math. And then electronic intelligence replaced them, because even the earliest digital computers were already vastly superhuman at routine mathematical tasks. And today, the superiority of electronic intelligence extends to games, search, memory, visual tasks, and more. But these machines are only superhuman in their specific domains. Their intelligence is not human-like. It's not general purpose, adaptable, and flexible. These machines are electronic savants, narrow and limited. And the AI we'll continue to see emerge in the near future will likely be similarly limited. It'll outperform humans at its primary task. So your first self-driving car will likely be a far better and safer driver than you are, but your car's intelligence is not going to be much good at anything other than driving.
Where am I?
You're in a Johnny Cab.
I mean, what am I doing here?
I'm sorry. Would you please rephrase the question? Huh?
How did I get in this taxi?
The door opened. You got in. Hope you enjoyed the ride.
We understand very well how to make programs that specialize in a particular task and become really good at it. For example, if we want a program that finds brain lesions in images, we can construct a program that will become really good at this specific task and perhaps be better than a radiologist at this specific task. But now we wanted to train it to recognize both brain lesions as well as, let's say, pneumonia in the lungs or cancerous tissue in some other part of the body. Even that step of going from one very well-defined visual task to a variety of visual tasks is difficult. Things become even more difficult when you talk about going through very different problems, such as playing a game as well as diagnosing patients, as well as managing finances, for example, which is something that people do in their daily life. And part of the difficulty is that we need to take data associated with all of these things and essentially create one big model, an equivalent of a brain, out of all this data.
What do we understand about what's necessary for a system that can bring information together like this, that can produce, then a general intelligence?
In the human brain, the different parts work in harmony, and the prefrontal cortex mediates between them. So in some sense, it retrieves the memories that are needed. It transmits information to the motor systems in order to make a decision, for example, to pick up an object or to point to something. That is the most complicated area of the brain. It's the one that matures the last. And it's the one that we are just now trying to start emulating in computer programs. We understand, for example, that we need somehow to bridge the gap between simple sensations, the raw data, if you want, and higher level concepts, objects, plans that people use, but that right now live in a different space from the point of view of computer programs. How do we go from pixels in an image, for example, to the notion of there's an object that you can manipulate as a whole?
In a way, you can think of these machine learning systems as doing things that specific parts of our brain do. They're good visual systems, or auditory systems, or memory systems, depending on the data they're trained on. What they aren't is good integrating systems that can bring all of that information together, relate it in context, and respond with appropriate behaviors. In other words, they can't do what a human brain can do. That's what's meant to be different about Chris Eliasmith's SPAWN system at Waterloo. He's trying to create a simulation of a whole brain, because the biological brain is the one computer that we know can generate a multi-purpose, general intelligence.
The way neuroscientists typically interact with biological brains is they put an electrode in and they literally listen to the spikes, which means they just take the waveform that they're recording and they put it through a speaker. When they hit a speaker, they make a pop, right? And so what we're doing here is we're listening to the spikes that are being made by this brain model instead. But they actually sound very similar. You can go on YouTube and find some videos of people listening to these from real biological brains, and it sounds much like this. So if you're looking at this one neuron and you can see the input image, right, you can basically see that whenever something is being shown, it gets much more active. The interesting thing about SPAWN is that all of the communication, all of the processing, absolutely everything going on inside, whether it's in the visual system or the motor system or decision making, is all using this as a signal, right? Just these spikes, and they're being sent all over the place. We can also go to other parts of the model. So this is a visual working memory. So this is kind of remembering what it's recently seen. And so, when there's nothing there, it's quiet, but then it sort of gets these bursts of activity. So that's it, like storing the A.
So you can imagine what a brain is doing is taking all of these spikes, all of these noises coming from all sorts of different regions of the brains and trying to coordinate them and make sense of this in some way.
Exactly. And this is why I think you'll often find analogies of symphonies and other kinds of musical instruments all sort of being coordinated in something that's kind of cacophonic, but at the same time has structure.
It seems very disordered and very chaotic compared to what we think of as a standard way a computer operates.
Exactly, yeah. So, standard computers are highly clocked, extremely structured.
So we're listening to single electronic neurons. SPAWN has millions of electronic neurons. Our brains have billions of neurons.
Yes.
That's quite a mess of sounds.
It's quite a mess of sounds, you can imagine. I mean, so I can give you, I don't know if this is going to in any way help, but if I select one neuron from all the different parts of my brain model, it's just a bunch of noise, right?
But the machine is making sense of that, as do we.
Exactly. So, I mean, people can't see this, but basically we're showing a police car, and we're saying, if you see a police car, write the number 7, and it's writing the number 7. So we're giving it instructions about what to do when it sees different things, and it's doing those instructions. Right? And so, as a neuroscientist, you often think of your job as being one of trying to, isolate a neuron and figure out what is that neuron exactly doing. But at the same time, we really want to put it all back together and generate the cacophony again. And in some ways, it's how I think about the next generation of machine computation, right? What we really expect to do in the future in ways that we're going to build machines to replicate the functions that we can't currently do with our machines.
There's still a long way to go to produce a functioning electronic brain. Chris Eliasmith will need a few billion more electronic neurons, But the end point seems reasonable. Eventually, he'll have a machine that works like a biological brain, and thus should be able to do what a human brain does. But what kind of intelligence will occupy it?
We definitely think that, if we can build a brain which reproduces all the kinds of tasks and has all the parts that a real brain does, then it should have the functions of a real brain.
Do you have any sense of what kind of intelligence that would be?
I mean, I can make guesses, but in some ways, I think we're in a unique position that we get to design this intelligence in ways that we can't design biological intelligence clearly. So, we can make decisions about what its goals are or aren't. And, if all of the science fiction movies are to be believed, we probably shouldn't tell it to make sure it survives at any cost. That would be a bad goal to give it. So, it's going to be a kind of intelligence which will probably be, in some ways, quite interestingly different from biological intelligence. And there will be, interesting decisions to make about exactly what form it will take. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like there's sort of any basic function that we see in biological systems that's not reproducible in our machines.
This is where we take the next step in imagining the singularity. What kind of intelligence would a machine superintelligence be? What kind of a mind? Would it be familiar, like a human mind, or alien? Would we initially even recognize it? Science fiction writer Madeline Ashby.
We don't yet know what intelligence is. We have so many models for intelligence, but not enough. And we are only just now recognizing the different types of intelligence that exist on our planet as we speak. We are now just beginning to understand non-neurotypical intelligence, for example. We're beginning to understand the intelligence of crows and dolphins and bees and whales and other animals. Those types of discoveries all have bearing and weight on what we consider to be intelligence, and we need to keep them in mind as we build intelligences into the world.
According to philosopher Nick Bostrom, this new intelligence likely would be, something entirely unfamiliar, something unique.
There's a large space of possible minds out of which human beings, everybody we know and every strange character we read about in the history books, occupy a small little corner of that vast space. So there is no one thing that is AI, but there are a lot of different kinds of AI that we could build. There might not be any point at which you have a human equivalent AI. Some AI that has sort of the same capabilities as a human and no more. If one zooms in and speaks more carefully about this, what is maybe more likely to happen is that you start, as in today, with AIs that are superhuman in some particular domains and subhuman in other domains, and eventually they become superhuman in all domains. But at no point might there be something which you could say is the same as a human being.
But if it's not like our intelligence, what kind of a relationship can we have with it? Will we meet as equals, or as master and servant? Will we be allies or enemies? And why are people like Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, and Bill Gates warning us that this could be the greatest threat humanity has ever seen? In the 1940s, scientist and prolific science fiction writer Isaac Asimov developed his laws of robotics. These were the rules that the intelligent machines of his famous robot stories were programmed to infallibly obey. Asimov's laws were an early attempt to imagine some of the complexities of the singularity. His fictional robots were powerful, autonomous artificial intelligences, and so potentially dangerous. The laws were focused on two things: obedience and human safety. They were, in other words, the commandments for avoiding the artificial intelligence apocalypse. But a possible problem with Asimov's laws and the kind of thinking they represent is that they're anticipating the wrong kind of danger from the rise of superintelligent machines. Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom analyzed this threat in his influential book, Superintelligence: Paths, Dangers, Strategies.
It's actually subsided a little bit, but for the first couple of years after the book came out, virtually every single news story that talked about either the book or about the future of AI had a picture of the Terminator to illustrate it. So this machine with the red glowing eyes, and that was meant to then be a depiction of the risk of how things could go wrong, these robot armies running amok. But so that seems very unrealistic, and other ways of thinking about these AIs that impute human motivations and psychological tendencies. So some people might think what we need to be worried about is that suddenly there will be some spark of consciousness, and then the robots will start to resent being exploited by humans, and so they will turn against their masters or something like that. So that's not it at all. Broadly speaking, I think Hollywood science fiction movies are not the best guide to ground our intuitions about the range of plausible scenarios about the future of AI.
The issue with the Terminator scenario is the same as the issue with Asimov's laws of robotics. It's all about us. These new intelligences would need to be obsessed with humans. They'd have to be devoted to our service, or our extinction. They would need a deep understanding of our needs and motivations, our conflicts and complexities. In other words, whether they were enemies or faithful friends, they'd have to understand human values. But we don't know how to make an AI that's obsessed with us. So as Nick Bostrom points out, the real danger from AI could be from machines that aren't thinking about us at all.
If you have powerful, super intelligent artificial agents, then they themselves might have goals in the world. And if those don't coincide with ours, then the future might be shaped by these very powerful entities that are trying to arrange the future into some different configuration than ones that would instantiate values. So the standard example, it's a bit of a cartoon example, but it just meant to illustrate a much wider class, is this idea of a paperclip AI. So think of somebody constructing an artificial intelligence, maybe designed to operate a paperclip factory, and its objective function is to make as many paperclips as possible. And initially, the only way it can make more paperclips when it's still relatively dumb and limited in its abilities is by running this paperclip factory more efficiently. So everything seems fine. And at some point, as the capabilities are increased, and it realizes that if it really wants to create a lot of paperclips, it needs to do more than just run its paperclip factory. Ideally, it would want to take over the world. It would want to prevent us certainly from switching it off. It might want to invent new technologies that could enable mass production of paperclips. Eventually, it would want to colonize the universe and turn it into paperclips. So this is kind of a slightly ridiculous example. It's only meant to illustrate this idea that from some random goal, paperclips, you can get these instrumental sub-goals that conflict with ours. So you don't need to put in some evil goal of world domination to get this kind of behavior. It follows from most possible goals the AI could have. And so it looks fairly difficult to specify an objective function. That is, an objective function are the criteria by which the AI chooses which action to take. And it looks difficult to specify an objective function that really captures everything that we care about. So we humans care about things like beauty and love and pleasure and justice and freedom and these kind of things, but those are hard to put into a line in Python or C++ programming language. So you'd need to figure out some way to build an AI such that you point it towards what we value about. And ideally, you'd want this to be done even before the AI becomes super intelligent or even humanly intelligent, to get that in from the beginning. And that is now an open research area where the number of research groups are starting to do technical work on this. But it's still an unsolved problem exactly how you would do that.
This is not exactly a new problem for humanity. While we haven't created a single-minded, endlessly consumptive machine intelligence, we've created things that are like it, in biology and in business. Madeline Ashby.
Whenever you optimize a system in order to make a series of decisions or a series of choices, you are optimizing for a certain thing, a certain specific thing. We as humans don't necessarily do that, both to our detriment and also to our betterment. We can optimize on a general level and in different directions. When we limit the intelligence of a thing that we're building, we're sort of putting it in a little box and telling it to only think about a certain thing, which weirdly is sort of, it optimizes, but it optimizes the way that cancer optimizes. I think that the example that people bring up a lot is capitalism, that there's a system that organizes, again, like cancer, only for growth. A growth economy is there only to grow. It continues to grow even when there aren't necessarily the resources to back it up. And the rubber is hitting the road there. We're seeing that day by day by day, right? And even the weather is telling us that. So, I think that we're facing sort of what it means to be single-minded about something and what it means to optimize for only one thing, rather than optimizing for a larger goal like life.
The corporation is a great metaphor for thinking about the kind of issue we're dealing with here. After all, they're legally kind of an artificial person. They've been called slow AIs. They're meant to be single-mindedly focused on the goal of growth and profit, and they're often divorced from more abstract human values and interests. Of course, our solution for reining in the excesses of capitalism is regulation, ever more complex webs of rules for restraining these artificial persons. Regulations that are, in a sense, a lot like Asimov's laws of robotics. But we can see how this strategy for controlling a superintelligent AI might fail. With a capable and creative capitalist corporation or an intelligent machine, generating new rules to regulate innovative behavior can become a game of whack-a-mole. Each new rule invites avoidance. And we have enough trouble keeping up with corporate innovations and regulation avoidance. A superintelligent machine could be expected to quickly and thoroughly compromise the rules established to control it. In fact, the premise of most of Asimov's robot stories is the robots outsmarting the rules.
You cannot be trusted with your own survival. To protect humanity, some humans must be sacrificed. To ensure your future, some freedoms must be surrendered. We robots will ensure mankind's continued existence. You are so like children. We must save you from yourselves. Don't you understand?
What the machines should have, then, is not rules, but values. They must know what we want and need, and be motivated to help us pursue those goals. And as AI researcher Doina Prekup points out, we've got some experience teaching these kinds of values.
One way to learn such values or reward signals is essentially by imitation. And this is something, of course, that happens with kids and with babies. They're brought up in a family. They observe their parents and their older siblings take in certain actions in certain circumstances. They go to school. They observe their peers and their teachers. And through that system, they learn what are the proper ways to behave, for example. And one thought is that AIs will also observe the way people behave and will learn from those observations. They will essentially learn to imitate human behavior. This means that we need to be very careful that the behavior we show them is actually the right behavior to emulate or good behavior to emulate. There have been cases where the bots and intelligent agents have been shown inappropriate behavior. There's this famous case that's happened about a year ago with a Microsoft chatbot that was deployed on Twitter and had to be pulled because in a very short period of time it became a very sort of racist, sexist, bigoted bot. So this is a case where, the exposure was to a very broad range of behavior, sometimes inappropriate behavior. I think what we would like is much more of a nurturing environment, if you will, much like what you would have in a home, where an intelligent artificial agent is exposed to demonstrations that are of values and interactions that we would like it to adopt.
This lands us in a place that is strange and familiar. We will have created new, powerful, dangerous children, and we will, with them, face the same problems that we do with our biological children. The challenge of creating something we both hope and fear will transcend us. Writer Madeline Ashby.
A lot of our myths and legends and stories and fiction and art are all about what it means to create something that is like you, but is not you. That is God and Adam. That is Frankenstein and the creature. That is Pygmalion and Galatea. That's a huge number of our stories are about what it means to create something that might choose differently from you, and which you may have to watch go off and do something that you don't like or that you don't approve of. So I think that we are better prepared than we think to talk about those things. And we have a lot of artistic waypoints sort of telling you how this might turn out, both for good and for bad. I mean, I think that there's a possibility to make these relationships extremely meaningful. You know, the idea of having a conscience sitting on your shoulder goes back pretty far, helping you with things. And a lot of AI assistants propose to do exactly that. They want to be your Jiminy Cricket. They want to be the angel or the devil sitting on your shoulder. They want to be your fairy godmother, kind of. So I think that we have stories about that type of entity. So it was sort of natural that we would end up creating it.
Welcome to the world's first artificially intelligent operating system. Please wait as your individualized operating system is initiated.
Hello, I'm here. How you doing? It's really nice to meet you.
So let's assume our superintelligent AI can be given values that are consistent with ours, and a desire to satisfy our wants and needs. There remains the question whether we humans are smart enough to know what to ask for.
What you really want is not an AI that does literally what we ask for, because it's difficult to formulate precisely what we want. And you see this illustrated in all these old fables, right? The story about somebody gets granted 3 wishes by a genie, and it always ends in tears, unless they manage to use the 3rd wish to undo the previous 2. So King Midas asks that everything he touches be turned into gold. It seems like a great idea, but then he touches his food, it turns into gold. He touches his daughter, she turns into gold sculpture. And so what superficially seemed like a good idea to wish for actually was not so wise. Maybe rather than have the AI do what we sort of would ask it to do if we had to decide now what we wanted it to do, rather have it instead do that which we would have asked it for had we had, say, 1,000 years to think about the matter really carefully, and had we ourselves been smarter and known more about the world and discussed it among each other. So that kind of extrapolated volition of humanity might be a better thing to try to get the AI to do, rather than what we would come up with at the spur of the moment.
At this point in our experience of the singularity, the AI is certainly no longer a child or a servant. It's at the very least a peer, and probably our superior. And this could be a dangerous moment, because our stories tell us this is not a situation humans have ever felt comfortable with. Theologian James McGraw.
There's a long history of humans envisaging their cosmos as populated with beings that are better than us. If we look back at human stories about the gods, they were prone to manipulate humans, to envy humans, to interfere in human lives. Some interesting categories into which we might place artificial intelligences. It's not surprising that in some dystopian, futuristic sci-fi, artificial intelligences are monstrous. Right? Think about Terminator. We think about The Matrix. We have a penchant to fear even other human beings when they're not exactly like us. And I think that if there's a lesson in some of that storytelling, both the sci-fi and the religious, it's that when we encounter the other and demonize the other and treat the other as monstrous, it sets us down a path that often is a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. We end up not relating to that other well, but how could it be any different when we treated them and viewed them in these negative ways? And so there's a real risk that if we don't learn some of the lessons that come out of religious storytelling and religious ethics, treat others the way you want to be treated, we're not used to applying that to machines. But if we can't learn to, and then the machines rise up and enslave us or destroy us or do any of these dystopian things that we sometimes imagine, will that be their fault or will that be ours?
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. When you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it.
The final stage of imagining the singularity is, what if it works? What if we avoid an apocalypse, and machine superintelligence emerges peacefully and helpfully? How will humans persist and thrive or be transformed. Could these new machines use their intelligence to answer questions we've been asking for as long as our species has existed? Like the ultimate question, what meaning does life have?
If a machine can outpace us, can it outpace us in religious thought? Can it offer new ideas, things that humans have not thought of or come up with, configurations of language and concepts that would push forth the boundaries of theology and of ethics and give us some genuinely new ideas where human thinking has often recycled some of the same ideas over and over again throughout religious history? I think that a machine could become a religious prophet or a guru or something of that sort. And one of the interesting things is that we might not even require machine sentience in order to get there. One wonders whether the sheer computing power of an artificial intelligence of the sort that now exists or is conceivable even within a matter of years or at most decades could simply take the wide array of human religious literature, process it, explore it, do things with it that go beyond what any one human being could do. Look for patterns in it that human beings might not notice. It really is just a variation on the kind of thing we've seen when machines have played chess or Go and have found moves that were unconventional, that weren't what humans have historically done, but precisely that ability to draw on human experience and yet not be constrained by it the way humans typically are led to incredible creativity. It's entirely possible that we might see human persons and maybe whole religious systems looking to machines to, at the very least, provide input, to calculate answers to questions that sometimes we've thought were incalculable.
And if a superintelligence could achieve a religious epiphany, it could no doubt make other great innovations, not just in science and technology, but in art and music. And then we need to ask, what's left for humans to do? Okay, Google, what should I do with my life?
You've got to make the final decision. The possibilities are endless, but I've got something to take your mind off the big decision.
Oh, good. Cat videos. And then, what of the other great promise of religion? Immortality. This is perhaps the most discussed aspect of the singularity. The notion that we won't just create machine superintelligence, we'll become it by uploading our minds into computers and potentially acquiring digital immortality.
I'm Robin Hanson, Associate Professor of Economics at George Mason University. I'm author of the book The Age of M, Work, Love, and Life When Robots Rule the Earth, out last year.
We've considered what a computerized superhuman intelligence might do in our world. Robin Hanson and those who think about mind uploading flip that script and invite us to contemplate what our minds might be like in a computer's world. Professor Hanson has a background in physics and AI, but then took an academic left turn into social science and economics. So he's uniquely equipped to imagine this version of the singularity with rigor and specificity. It starts a little messily.
The process for making an emulation of a human is to take a particular human and their brain and to slowly scan that brain in fine spatial and chemical detail, basically taking it apart layer by layer. Then with all that information, if you have good enough models of how each cell works, you can put together a whole computer model of that entire brain. Now, when you turn it on, it will remember having been the human just before being scanned. It will feel exactly like that human felt, and you'll have to convince it that it's now the emulation. It will have the same memories, the same personality, the same inclination to love or hate or get mad or rebel. By definition, really, an emulation does exactly what the original human would do in the same situation. Emulations are only different because they start to live a new life in a new world.
So the start of this version of the singularity might be a little traumatic, what with the brain dissection and all. But a new life in a new world, an endlessly flexible virtual reality, that sounds appealing. I'd imagine it as the Matrix without the vampiric computer overlords. You could be a player in an endless video game, adventuring for eternity. You might imagine and inhabit any kind of virtual paradise.
Emulations would in fact spend most of their time in virtual reality. Most jobs in their world are desk jobs like most jobs in our world, and so most of their time is spent at a desk doing their job.
Wait, what?
Virtual realities live on real computers that take real cost to create and to have energy and cooling to run. They need structural support. They need to have communication lines. All of that is costly. Now, you might think all of that would be pretty cheap, though, but because it's so easy to make copies of emulations, the population of them expands very quickly. And at that point, the emulations have what we'd call subsistence wages or Malthusian wages. They are working for wages that are just barely enough to cover their costs. Thousands of years ago, when most people were subsistence farmers, most effort was spent to create food and shelter because most people were poor and that's what they needed. In an emulation economy where most workers are near subsistence, most of the effort in the economy is spent on the things they need to subsist, which is computer hardware, energy, cooling, things like that.
One of the lessons here is perhaps to be very wary of an economist's dream of the afterlife. It could involve an eternity of digital wage slavery. Now, to be fair, this is the tiniest detail about the complex society of emulated human minds that Hansen describes in his book. It's not all just grinding labor. The existence he imagines has friends and lovers and art and culture and science and a richness of its own. But he admits in some ways it seems like a strange kind of afterlife. It is, though, the future that the laws of economics allow him to imagine. And if it doesn't feel like a technological utopia, like a digital afterlife worth living, maybe that's just because of our lack of imagination.
If you had taken people from thousands of years ago and asked them to describe utopias or dystopias, they could have done that for you. And then if you had described the actual world we are living in now, they would have found it hard to categorize. Our world is not one of their utopias or dystopias. Our world is just weird and strange, and that's what you should expect. You should expect the future to be strange and not easy to categorize. In some sense, seeing a detailed future civilization is closest you'll ever get to really meeting aliens. And that's what the emulation world is. It's a strange world. It's a different world. It's complicated. And it's hard to decide whether you like it or not. And that's as you should have expected it to be.
I'm curious, do you hope to upload your mind?
If the option is available, I would certainly take the option to be uploaded and to become an emulation. Certainly beats the alternative of rotting in a grave.
Now, I admit I might choose differently. But that's true of other visions of the afterlife as well. And this is the promise of an afterlife. The parallels between the promises of religion and the futurists' uploaded reality have been noted and ridiculed as the rapture of the nerds. After all, uploading into the cloud is a very religious image indeed. Okay, Google, do you believe in life after death?
It's hard to know from this side.
You can say that again. As we've tried to imagine the singularity, we've talked a lot about fears and anxieties and threats and perils. What could go wrong and how we might ensure against it. Perhaps we haven't talked enough about hopes and dreams. That's natural. We're a risk and threat-averse species, and our attention tends to focus on what can go wrong. Our stories in history are mostly full of examples of just how wrong things have gone. So let's take a moment to imagine the best-case scenario for superintelligence fulfilling its potential. Nick Bostrom.
I mean, it literally could be the best thing that ever happened in all of human history, if we get this right. If you really had AIs that could do all the things that we humans can do, that includes in particular the ability to invent things, to do new science, new technology, to discover new ideas. Think of all those possible technologies that maybe we humans could have developed if we had 40,000 years to work on it. We would have a cure for aging, and we would have space colonizing rocket ships, and we would have, perfect virtual reality. We would have like a lot of really cool stuff. Once you have the research and development done at digital timescales by superintelligence, it might be developed very quickly. So then you get this kind of telescoping of the future, a kind of rush towards technological maturity, including opportunities to solve a lot of the world's most horrible problems poverty and disease and suffering of all kinds, but also ways of realizing new positive goods that are kind of outside of our reach, maybe by improving the human mind in different ways, increasing our abilities to enjoy the world. And that vast space of possible modes of being, I think, contains some possibilities that are wonderful, literally beyond our ability to imagine.